Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2. In this video, I will give my overall review for Season 2 of Strange New Worlds as a whole, so I have to start with a spoiler warning for the entirety of Season 2 of Strange New Worlds. If you have not seen every single episode of Season 2 of Strange New Worlds, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So, I've talked before about how I think Strange New Worlds is easily the best show in modern Star Trek, the best modern Star Trek show in the modern Star Trek era, Discovery and onward. And I stand by that. I absolutely did. It was amazing. I was just so happy seeing these characters again and exploring these characters. And to me, these characters are way more interesting than any of the characters in any other shows, except for maybe Lower Decks. But I think, don't get me wrong, I love Lower Decks. Lower Decks! But I think Strange New Worlds is, because Lower Decks is intentionally a bit goofy and sometimes a bit, too silly for my taste. Strange New Worlds is the seriousness and the character stories, and sometimes it can be goofy too, and that's okay, but it's not, all the time goofy. And so overall, I just enjoy this show a lot better. Even though I prefer the TNG setting of Lower Decks to the TOS setting of Strange New Worlds. But yeah, so I still believe that this is the best show in modern Trek era. I think it's way better than Picard Season 3, which a lot of other people seem to disagree with me on, but not everyone. But anyway, all that being said, I think Season 2 of Strange New Worlds was noticeably weaker than Season 3. Now the thing is, when we were building up, Season 3, I meant Season 1, sorry, it's a little bit weaker than Season 1. And that's not to say, of course, I don't like it. As I said, I still love it. I still love this show. But I do think it is a tad bit of a downgrade from Season 1. Now, in the build-up for Season 2, I've heard a lot of talk about, wow, we're trying new things, we're taking risks, we're going to go in crazy places, we're doing all these crazy things with Season 2. And to be honest, that had me a little bit worried. Because I was worried that they would sort of go overboard. And with taking risk or doing new and different things, because I liked Season 1 and I really wanted to see more of that and continue off of what they had rather than go in crazy directions. And honestly, I think my fears were a little bit justified. So the show took a lot of risks. Took a lot of chances, and those risks didn't always pay off. And in my opinion, sometimes it went a bit too far out there, or maybe what it was trying didn't quite work for the show. It didn't quite jive. Whereas I felt like, and the thing with Season 1 also could be described as having a lot of different genres, like a lot of different episodes cover a different genre or has a different feel to that. But I think Season 2 did that too much. It took it in too much of a direction, and the episodes were almost too different, or at least some of them were. And I feel like it lost that sort of cohesion that, even though Season 1 was episodic, it lost that kind of cohesion that Season 1 had. And it just sometimes felt too jarring, going from really totally different genres to another. So I just feel like they maybe overdid it a bit. But that being said, as I said, I still love the season. I still love the characters, and I love some of the arcs. But some of the arcs didn't quite work for me, and they weren't quite as good as the ones in Season 1. as I said. But again, I'm just comparing it to season 1, which I thought was a near masterpiece and one of the best seasons of any Star Trek show. Whereas I wouldn't say that with season 2, but I still would say it's a good season. I still would say it's a strong season, and I definitely would say it's better than most of what we get in modern Trek. It's just I find myself comparing it a lot to season 1 because I feel like it's a step down, which is a disappointment because I wanted it to be a step up. But hopefully they will course correct in season 3. I'm really hoping. I didn't want to spend too much time going over the episodes, but since the episodes were so different, I do feel like I need to talk about them a bit. And so for me, my sort of way of ranking the episodes, now I'm not going to do a full-on like top 10 from 10 to 1 sort of thing, but I will divide them into 3 tiers. Top tier, middle tier, and the lower tier. And that's the thing. So there's 4 episodes in my top tier, 2 episodes in my middle tier, and 4 in my lower tier. Whereas in season 1, I think there was only 2 in my lower tier. And the ones in my lower tier for season 2, a couple of them I think are actually bad episodes. Whereas in season 1, I didn't think there was any bad episodes. There was a couple that I thought was kind of mediocre. But in season 2, there's a couple ones that I think I would classify as bad. But anyway, so getting into my top tier, and these are, again, still high-quality episodes I personally love. Also, before I get into the tiers, I want to talk a bit about how, because the genres of each episode are so different, or the feel of each episode is different, and it seems like it has a different target audience, I've noticed this thing with Strange New Worlds, which actually, I think it has this phenomenon that I think is more pronounced with this show than I think any other Star Trek show, where people who like the show are saying, forgetting about those haters who hate anything Kurtzman is involved with, like they're not relevant, but people who actually do like the show have very, very varying opinions on what episodes they like. It kind of reminds me of Black Mirror in that way, because Black Mirror, being an anthology show, has a totally different character, sometimes totally different feel. Usually the themes and the feel are similar throughout most of the episodes, but that can vary as well. And I talked about this when I recently covered Black Mirror season 6, is that everyone has such varying opinions on the greatest episodes. Like, literally, the episode I think is the absolute worst episode ever, some people love, and some other episodes I think aren't so good, some people love, and some of my favorite episodes people think are the worst episode. Like one episode in particular I'm thinking of that I really like, that most people would say is the worst episode ever, and then but there's so much varying degrees. It's just like some people agree with me on some episodes, disagree with me on the others, and then I would, it's varying. There's no, there's some, if you look at, there's some majority has this consensus where some episodes are really hated and some episodes are really loved, but it's just, for the most part, it's just so varied, more so than most shows. I know some people might be saying, oh, well, that could be true of any show, but no, not to this degree. Especially to the degree of Black Mirror. I think it's more, there's less consensus on what's good, and there's so much, and more of a variety of what people like, because it appeals, because each episode has a different genre, a different character, different stories, so different things will appeal to different people depending on their taste, more so than most shows. And I'm starting to feel that same effect with Strange New Worlds, even including season 1, but I think this is getting worse for season 2. So before I get into my tiers, I did want to make the disclaimer that most people will disagree with this, and most people will probably disagree with your tiering, because the opinions on these episodes, because it's just thinking about like talking to my sister, who has her own channel, and then my parents, and then there's a couple episodes that me and my sister love and my mom hates, and there's a couple episodes that me and my mom love that my sister hates, and there's a couple episodes that my sister and my mom love and I hate, and then it was my dad. There's some episodes where he agrees with me that episode's terrible. Then in the other episode he agrees with my mother that it's actually quite good. Like the opinion just from that target, that test audience of 4 people, the opinions are so varying, and that's actually indicative when I go online and see the wider opinions of what people think and the ratings on IMDb. They're so like all over the place. So I really wanted to start with that disclaimer. And I think that is a result of Strange New Worlds, particularly Season 2, trying so hard to do so many different things. So it has that Black Mirror effect where different genres were appeal to different people, and their mileage will vary. So let me just give my opinion though on which episodes worked and which episodes didn't. So I'll start with my top tier episodes. Ad Aspera per Spera, Among the Lotus Eaters, Lost in Translations, Those Old Scientists. Those are the ones that really worked for me. Now, Ad Aspera per Spera was the trial episode. I loved it. A lot of people compare it to The Measure of Man. I actually was bold enough to say I liked it better than The Measure of Man, although it's hard to compare something fresh that you've just seen that's modern to something that was sitting with me for like 20, 30 years, so I'm kind of sick of. But I think from the virtue of it being in Season 2 of TNG, which I think was cheese, and I think some of that cheese rubbed off on that episode, I think this one's better. And I loved it. Like, it brought me to tears. I think it really worked for me. And it was a really strong episode. Then there was Among the Lotus Eaters, which was... I didn't like it quite as much. Like, I wouldn't say this was, like, a 10 out of 10, but I would still put it in the top tier of the season because... it was interesting. You got a lot of insights to the characters, and it was interesting seeing them lose their memories and what they hold on to and what the key is. I actually loved the part with Ortegas when she actually forgot everything. We followed her. I think this is a really well-written episode. I think the villain in the episode was kind of a Trek cliche, but since they used it to tell such interesting, great stories, I was willing to allow that and to suspend my disbelief and go with it. And it was, they visited a planet that was seen in the original series. So, I enjoyed that a lot, which I've heard some people didn't like it. Lost in Translation, this is one I think was low rated on IMDb. Apparently people didn't like this one. This is the horror episode. I wouldn't say as much as a horror as a thriller. Now it did play into, as I said, I'm getting to spoilers, it did play into the stereotypical Trek trope of, the Starfleet crews killing an alien species by accident because they didn't recognize them as an alien species. I just watched the episode Home Soil from TNG that did that same thing, and it was ripping off the episode Devil in the Dark that did the same thing. And then it puts that other spin where they're trying to communicate, these alien races are trying to communicate with them in weird, subtle, subliminal ways, and that's very reminiscent of episodes like Night Terrors or what's that one from Voyager that sucks, The Fight, and other episodes. So it's very stereotypical Star Trek, but they take that cliche and they actually make it good by telling the characters. So like we follow the character of Uhura through this episode that makes it stick out. And actually that's what I think season 1 did the best. They take things that should be like really tired and old, and we've seen it but dozens of times in Star Trek, like the virus episode, or in season 2 we also got the trial episode, and here we got the aliens trying to communicate and Starfleet's accidentally killing them. Yet they make it fresh somehow. and make it good by having such brought out characters. So I actually really like that episode. And the other one in my top tier would probably name my favorite episode of the season, Those Old Scientists. The crossover with Lower Decks. It's not just because I like Lower Decks, because I was excited about this concept, but I was a bit weary of it because I was I didn't, because it was a risk. I didn't know if they were going to make it work, and if it was going to work, or if it was going to come off as too hokey or too trying too hard or whatever. But it actually, too gimmicky, that's the word I'm looking for. But it actually worked. And it worked surprisingly well. They took the best of the characters of Boimler and Mariner, and also the humor, of course, absolutely hilarious. But not only was it hilarious, they told like really powerful emotional stories, which surprised me. Like, I wasn't expecting that in this episode, how emotional it was and just how good the character stories was. So it's not just that they took characters from Lower Decks, which, as I said, I love Lower Decks, but they just made it surprisingly like heartwarming. So then I get to my middle tier, which the episodes I thought, they were decent. Which, ironically, the two episodes in my middle tier are the season premiere and the season finale. The Broken Circle and Hegemony, or however, I don't know, people are pronouncing it differently. But anyway, The Broken Circle, I've heard some people really hate this episode, and I'm like, I don't think it was that bad. It was actually kind of interesting seeing Spock, go off on his own rogue mission, and there was a war. People were trying to start a war with the Klingons and the Federation, and they had to go in and stop them, and we get to see what happened to that girl the little girl who was in the Aliens episode from last season, and I liked it. But some things about that episode didn't work, like the enhanced super soldier drugs that Manga and Nurse Chapel took. That didn't quite work. So I can see why some people hate it. But I actually thought that was a decent episode. And Hegemony, it's hard to judge it because it's part 1 of 2, and I haven't seen part 2 yet. And so it kind of depends on how well part 2 is. But something discouraged me about this episode, because I thought it would be, as I was watching, I think it would be very interesting if they learned in part 2 that they learned more about the Gorn, and that they were actually more of a fleshed out alien, sentient species with their own sort of motivations, and it humanizes them more, to coin a phrase. But I read this article, interview with Akiva Goldsman, and he was saying, oh no, the Gorn are not going to be humanized or whatever at all. They're just monsters for season 1, 2, and 3. Maybe later we'll do that. But he was including season 3 in that they're just being monsters. And that's less interesting to me. And I think the Gorn were kind of mishandled this season, not as badly as they were mishandled in season 1, but still, I find it hard to get as excited about the Gorn. But again, this is not a bad episode. It was still good because we had a lot of good character members. I think the stuff with Pike and Patel was very strong, and it was very sort of exciting, suspenseful stuff that I think worked for the most part. So then I'll get to the lower tier, the episodes that didn't work for me. And that is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, Charades, Under the Cloak of War, and Subspace Rhapsody. Now, Tomorrow, this is one most people love, so I'm on the outskirts here. And I wanted to like this episode. Really, it's not like I think, those people are wrong, this episode sucks. It's more of, I wanted to like it. But to me, Strange New Worlds works in the 23rd century setting, but when they take it to a modern day setting, it comes off as too tacky. And I felt the same thing, and that's why I was comparing it a lot in my head to like the Voyager season 3 two-parter Future's End, because I felt the same way. It didn't feel like actual modern society. It felt really silly and tacky, and it didn't feel true to what the 90s were actually like. And same thing with Picard season 2, when they went into modern era, it felt off and like didn't work. Now, I'm not saying this is as bad as Picard season 2, don't get me wrong, it's definitely not. Because there were some things about this episode I did like, but getting to what I found tacky, especially the Romulan in disguise agent. Like, I didn't buy her as a character at all. And some things like her filming the cops and getting them to go away, and the useless car chase scenes reminded me of Picard season 2. And yeah, that character who turned out to be a Romulan reminded me of Rain Robinson from Voyager. So yeah, the thing I really liked about the episode, though, was the connection between La'an and Kirk. I think that was well played, and I like what they did with that ongoing storyline this season, which I'll talk about more later in the video. So I didn't think the episode was a total wash. As I said, I actually thought it was a kind of decent episode, but it's just, I don't think, this is the one thing I don't think quite worked. And then there's the episode Charades, where they're trying to do another Spock Vulcan comedy, sort of playing off of Spock Amok from season 1, which I surprisingly liked Spock Amok. This one I did not, because this one played too heavily on the very stereotypical romantic comedy tropes, like the meet the parents tropes, where they have to meet the mean, upset parents, and they're trying to impress them, and they're trying very hard not to be impressed because they're prejudiced or something. Like, I've seen that so many times before, and I'm just iffy about this whole Chapel Spock thing. I mean, there were some humorous moments in this episode of Spock being human, and some interesting character moments, but I think it was overshadowed by the just cliche-ness of it. And so then, Under the Cloak of War, that was the episode that tried to be like Duet, I feel, and it tried to be like Detrell, and it tried to have this very serious, heavy episode about the traumas of war and dealing with PTSD. And I think those are very, notable topics that could, if handled correctly, could lead to some really powerful drama. But I don't think it was handled correctly. Like, I like the flashbacks. It was interesting getting the backstory of seeing them actually in the war. But I think the ending is what ruined this episode for me, for the most part. It's like, I really question what they're actually trying to say. I think it muddles the whole message of the episode, and I think there's more interesting things that could have done it. So to me, I feel like this script needed a couple more paths to tighten it up. At the moment, it seems sort of the message of it and the meaning of it is very jarbled. And then there's the old Subspace Rhapsody. Now, let's leave aside the fact that I don't like musicals. Let's just toss that aside. Because, a musical could be done in a way that I like. But I think it is worth noting that I do feel like, some genres don't work for some shows. And I think musical is a genre that doesn't work for most shows, especially shows that aren't comedies. Like, if Lower Decks wanted to do a musical episode, I might actually enjoy that a lot. But when you take what is for the most part a serious drama, especially you air this episode right after the heavy Under the Cloak of War, and then contrasted to this, it was genre whiplash. It's a harder sell for me. And they did not succeed in that hard sell, which, to be fair, the odds were against them. But so they had, but they could have really. I see a scenario where I'm not rigid, I'm not dismissive. I'm like, well, fuck musicals. I'm definitely not gonna like this. Like, they could have impressed me, but they had a lot steeper, higher hill to climb, and they did not get there. Maybe halfway, if I'm being generous, but that's about it. Because they had some great character moments in it, which is what I did appreciate, and which is why I wouldn't say this episode completely, totally sucked. And this is not going to end up in like my top 30 worst episodes of the Star Trek franchise, not by a long shot. But from this good show, Strange New Worlds, which has had mostly great episodes, I do think this is the weakest of that good show. And so they had some things that I liked. There were some character moments. They explored the relationship with Kirk and La'an. As I said, I appreciated that. And there were some emotional moments with Uhura, like realizing, finding her voice, so to speak. And there were some funny moments, like the thing with, Pike and Patel, like having that conversation on the bridge when they started singing, "This is a private conversation." I thought that was hilarious. But I think that's overshadowed by, this episode did get too gimmicky. It got too tropey. Well, too gimmicky, I think is the better way to say, because they just said, oh, let's just have this number of La'an singing about her sorrows, which went on for way too long, and let's have horror and engineering singing. Like, they had too many songs that didn't contribute anything to the story, and they were just there for the sake of doing a musical, and that's what bothered me. Like, there was a way. As I said, there's a way. It's not an easy task, but there's a way that could have impressed me, or at least had me say, that was a decent emotional episode. But it didn't quite get there because it was too bogged down and too many gimmicks and musical numbers that went on for way too long, or didn't really need to be there in the first place. And as I said, this was the only episode of Strange New Worlds ever that I was constantly checking the time and being like, is this episode over yet? And again, it's harder because I don't like musicals. It would be harder to impress me, but not impossible. And I think, even if as I said, if I try to toss aside the fact I don't like musicals, it didn't offer. It was kind of too cliche and too gimmicky, and it did not offer much enough new to make it a good episode. So, anyway, that is, I think, all I had to say about the episodes. I wanted next to talk about some of the themes, because there were some continuing themes this season that went throughout the season. There was the first theme I wanted to talk about is La'an's crush on Kirk. Now, which I already brought that up a couple of times, because I think this actually worked to me. I did, even though I mentioned put Tomorrow in my lower tier, that was what I liked about that episode. And so when they continued that, I thought that was actually a very unique way to explore La'an's character, her having this love affair with this alternate version of Kirk, so it's not really Kirk, and it was in a different timeline that she's not supposed to talk about, so she can't bring it up, but yet she's kind of smitten with him, and when he comes aboard the ship, she makes excuses to be with them, and when he's talking to her, he's very charming, and it really gets her, but then when she sees her with other people like Uhura and Una, she gets a bit jealous. And I think this is a really fascinating take on the unrequited love storyline, because it kind of is and it kind of isn't, and that's what makes it unique. The whole time travel aspect of it, this being an alternate version, and her not being allowed to talk about it, which she eventually does, but then we find out that this is the time where he's with Carol Marcus, who is pregnant, at this point in the stage. Which in my original review, I incorrectly said that that violated canon, but a lot of people pointed out to me correctly that it does not. That because Kirk did know about Carol's son, but eventually we do know that she is going to eventually tell Kirk to stay away, and that she doesn't want him raising her son, and they're gonna break up. But that hasn't happened yet. At this point, they're still together, and I think it's kind of. Well, I guess it's very much in Kirk's character, but it's kind of sleazy of him to be obviously flirting with. I think he was obviously flirting with Lon, and then be like, "Oh no, I have a girlfriend." But maybe that's just in his personality. And I do like that when he was like, talking to her, she's like, "Are you hitting on me?" I think it was kind of a nudge at the Star Trek 2009 where Kirk hit on her. But I liked that storyline. I liked how it played out, even though we got the resolution in the musical episode, but they weren't singing in that scene. But yeah, so it's, as I said, I didn't totally hate that episode. There were things I liked about that, and that worked for me. So the next storyline is the new chief engineer, Pelia, and her quirkiness. I have mixed feelings on this. Now everyone's like, "Oh, it's Carol Kane. She's the well-known, one of the great classic comedy actors," and so and I got nothing against her. I think she's a good actor. I liked her in Scrooge and The Princess Bride and whatnot, but I don't know if she really worked for me. Particularly that accent she was putting on. I think every time she spoke, I found it very hard to follow what she was saying. And I know I sound like ignorant by saying that, but I don't know if she was doing it correctly though, because that's not her real accent. And it's just, I don't know. And her quirkiness, sometimes it was cute, sometimes it was annoying. Sometimes it was funny. Like sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. Sometimes I was just like, and a lot of times when this character appeared, they were just like, it's like the show felt obligated. Oh, we got to show Carol Kane, and it didn't feel like completely relevant to the story. And she definitely did not have an arc or anything. And I got kind of tired of her saying, "Oh, you used to be a student of mine," and "Oh, you were a bad student." Oh, I do like how she's blunt. See, I got mixed feelings about her. So I'm not quite sure, overall how I feel about how that whole storyline worked. So the other theme or storyline was M'Baga's, Chapel's, and Ortega's PTSD. Now, as I said, this is an interesting way to go. It's been a while since I've seen season 1, but I don't recall them mentioning that these characters were in the Klingon War and that they have trauma from it. Maybe they did mention it, I'm just not remembering it, but I definitely didn't focus on it as much as they did in season 2. And as I said, it could be very powerful drama, very great character stories to explore people's traumas over being in the war and how that affects them. But I don't think it was handled particularly well. Like in M'Baga's, I think they botched it, as I said, with the ending of that episode, Under the Cloak of War. Chapel, I didn't buy hers at all. I'm sorry to say. It just didn't seem to fit in her character. Ortega's, I think, actually, ironically, is the one that did work for me the most, but it was also the one that they explored the least. So, and I kind of wish they had focused more on Ortega and not M'Baga, personally. And of course, we find out M'Baga has this, is a master fighting skill just because the actor was, and this wasn't alluded to at all in season 1, and he's actually a doctor. So I have mixed feelings about that whole thing too. Then another theme or storyline is horror being uptight and stressed. As I said, this one actually worked for me. it was interesting getting the contrast in the Lower Decks crossover episode. Most of all, when Mariner is Uhura's like a hero of hers, and she has this image of Uhura of being this, really, heroic, stand up for nothing, but someone who can have fun, and then meeting Uhura as a young person who's younger than her, in her 20s, and finding her being uptight, and then Mariner's response of, hey, let's loosen you up. I actually think that worked, and I think they earned it throughout the season by building up to how sort of stressed and uptight she was, particularly in that horror episode that focused on her. And so I think this storyline, and then she finally decides to loosen up and find her confidence in the musical episode, which is one of the things I did like about that episode. So overall, this storyline did really work for me. But so now let's get to one that really didn't work for me, and that's the Chapel and Spock romance. Now, I want to say let's set aside canon and set aside Spock, and that this is supposed to be the same characters from Spock from the original series and Nurse Chapel from the original series. But the thing is, and some people might fault me for this and say I'm looking at it the wrong way, but I can't help it. The thing is, I can't. I literally can't put it aside. Like, every time I try to pretend like these are two totally different characters, it seems like a totally different situation. That's not even, it's like the analogy doesn't even hold. If I say, oh, let's pretend this is some random Vulcan and this is some random nurse that has no connection to these original series characters, it seems like a absolutely totally and separate and totally complete different story than the one I'm seeing on screen. So it's not even, I think it's a futile exercise personally. So to say, I think, and this is just my mind, maybe some other people can, but I cannot separate this from canon, because they're telling me this is Nurse Chapel, and because they're telling me it's Spock, then I'm constantly going to see how does this fit into the original series. These are the same characters from the original series. I cannot separate it, and if I do, it's a totally different show, and it's not even worth. It's not what I'm seeing on screen. I personally think you cannot separate these things. And it does not fit into canon. And it bothers me. And this is why I couldn't really get into Nurse Chapel's character overall. Because she's nothing like. And my sister, I think, joked one time, oh, it's going to be a shame when Nurse Chapel gets the lobotomy in order to become the character she is in the original series. And Spock absolutely has zero feelings for her in the original series, and really, and she's the one really smitten with him. Now, as I said, they might play some mental gymnastics to get it to match up, but even so, it's why I just think it's a bad idea to do this. And okay, for a moment, I am actually going to toss canon aside. I'm going to prove that I can. I am going to completely toss canon aside and say, what if these are two, just a random Vulcan and a random nurse? The storyline between them seems inconsistent. Like, at first, Nurse Chapel seems completely madly in love with Spock, and she's very sad when Boimler comes and says that he's going to become emotionless, and she's upset about that. And then in a few episodes later, she's like, fuck it, I don't care about you, Spock. I'm leaving to go off to this apprenticeship, and I have no consideration for your feelings whatsoever. That felt inconsistent and jarring, and to be honest, I didn't even notice that much when they got together. Like, people had in the comments had to point it out. I was like, oh really, they got together? I guess I saw them kind of kiss, sort of, but I didn't realize that they were in a full-on relationship until the next episode when they said they were. So contrary to what I just said before, I am going to completely toss aside the canon concerns and completely ignoring them. This love story does not work. It was very inconsistent and very sloppy throughout the season. So yeah, this is easily my least favorite storyline. Now, the next, there's the Pikes Romance with Patel. This seemed a bit jarring to me as well, because in season 1, I referred to Patel, Captain Patel, as like, and Pike as friends with benefits, because it seems like they didn't actually have a thing, that they just slept with each other and hung out from time to time. But in season 2 is a full-on romance. And so I found that a bit jarring, and I guess I found the way that, I don't know, I never really connected with Captain Patel's character. She feels like the generic love interest. And to be honest, I kind of felt that way a little bit for Cassidy Yates and DS9. And some people may hate me for that, but it's true. And I feel that same way for Patel, that she's not really fleshed out. She's just, let's give the captain a love interest. And so, to be honest, like, if people are wondering if she's gonna die in season 3, I wouldn't mind, to be honest. And it might actually, because I don't think they've really fleshed out her character at all. Like, there's some of the scenes between them and them learning to get together in their fights and learning to compromise was interesting, but only from Pike's perspective. She seems to be just a prop for Pike, which I think is a shame. I think they should have a fully developed character. And so sometimes I do like what they did, like, as I said, the whole private conversation thing and the whole Pike being, defying orders to rescue her in the finale. Like, those things worked for me, but my only through in those storylines was Pike. It seemed like she was just the prop for him, and which I don't think quite works. And also, I got a note that this is mainly Pike's storyline throughout season 2, his through storyline. And it's nowhere near as good as his through storyline in season 1, which was the strongest. Him dealing with his impending doom. Now, I'm glad that they didn't rehash that, because I think the finale of season 1 really resolved that. So if they did that, if they touched on that more this season, I think it would have felt repetitive. So I'm glad they didn't, don't get me wrong. But this is a very poor replacement for it, just saying. And then Una, I'm trying to see if she had a theme or storyline this season, and I guess the one thing you could say is that she was learning to relax, because she had and this is the same storyline she had in season 1, basically, where she was uptight, and because we get a couple scenes with her with Pelia and her, hating Pelia because she gave her bad grades or whatever, and then them like coming to terms with each other, and then we see her sort of tutoring Kirk in the musical episode how to be a good commander, and of course in the Lower Decks crossover we see that Boimler was terrified of her, and so she feels like that she was, so why is he so terrified? Am I going to die or whatever? So yes, so what I would say about Una Chen Riley is that she remains the most underutilized character. She's supposed to be the main character. She's usually on the poster with Spock and Pike. Yeah, I feel like they don't, and I think she's a really good character, and I think she's a really good actress who plays her. So why are they underutilizing her? I feel like sometimes they don't know what to do with her. Now, as I said, I loved her trial episode. I thought that was amazing, and I loved how they reconnected it with the Lower Decks episode, Those Old Scientists, where Boimler said in the future, what she said at that trial is on a poster to recruit Starfleet, and how that was one of the most beautiful, touching moments in this entire show. And in fact, I think I shed a tear on that. So I love that. But I feel like they should have touched on the repercussions of the trial, how she feels about being discriminated against, and how Starfleet's kind of shoving that under the rug just for her, yet still discriminating against her other people, and how that makes her feel, how she relates to the other crew members. And they didn't. Like, the only follow-up to that trial episode we really got was that one scene in Those Old Scientists. And instead they go back to her being uptight or whatever. So, and they didn't show her enough. I really feel, and like, that's one of the things I like about the finale, is we actually got to see her in command of the Enterprise for a good while. And I really feel like we need to get more of that. I really feel like Season 3 needs to explore this character and utilize her more. She's a good character. Stop ignoring her. Honestly, I find her more interesting than M'Baga and La'an. They seem to want to focus more on them. Anyway, another storyline is Sam Kirk's jealousy of James Kirk, which was mostly explored, I think, in the Lost in Translation episode when James came on board, but they touched on this a bit more, I believe, in the musical episode. And I mean, this was like, these are basically side characters, so it wasn't like a main theme, a main storyline, but I liked it. It was a nice little texture to the episode and to these siblings, and I think we are building towards Sam resigning from Starfleet to become a full-on scientist, because we do know that's eventually where he gets killed by those stupid jellyfish alien thingies in that terrible episode. Anyway, another theme, this one absolutely did not work for me, was the Gorn threat. Because, alright, they mentioned it at the end of the first episode as sort of a cliffhanger, where April's like, oh, it's a good thing that we evaded a war with the Klingons, because we can't afford to fight a war on two fronts, and oh my god, this war with the Gorn is coming, and then they never really touch on it again until the finale, and they don't really touch on it at all. It's not like a war, there's just like, oh, there's tensions between them. And then, and as I said, like, I don't like the concept of, oh, the Gorn are just evil monsters. Star Trek is all about looking beyond that, and I think it needs to. Like, even really terrible, despicable aliens like the Cardassians, there's some nuance to that, like Garrick, who actually helps the heroes, but in a terrible way. And you could say the Borg, but then the Borg were also overused and misused to death. And again, you got nuance with the Borg as well, with like Hugh and Seven of Nine. So to have this, oh, they're just evil monsters, doesn't work in Star Trek for me, I don't think. But anyway, the other theme I would say would be, and this is kind of a weak theme, but I think it was kind of there, was because the Klingons actually appeared more than the Gorn did this season. And so the other thing I would say was dealing with the Klingons post-war. And I actually think this as a concept is interesting. And this is probably what I liked about the first episode the most, how there's this rogue fashion making money, and this good commentary on how, corporations make money and they start wars in order to make more money. and so I like that, and I think that worked, and how Spock had to go drink blood wine with them. I think that worked very well. I love that. But then, as I said later with the Cloak of War one, I think they mishandled it. I think it was an interesting concept, and had it been played out differently, it could have actually been really good. But I think they just bumbled the ending there. And And then, of course, the dancing, singing Klingons. They were the threat in the musical episode, but they were really just there to be a threat of the week. And they really made it the Klingons just so they could have that gag with the Klingons singing. So it's really nothing to that. That doesn't really contribute anything. That was just a gimmick. I gotta mention the fact that this saves Modern Trek by for the first live action Modern Trek where the Klingons have decent makeup. Now, I heard some people complain like, oh, this makeup's still not good. It's still a bit rigid. It doesn't look exactly like the TNG DS9 eras. Stop being so goddamn picky. That's what I have to say with that. Do you want to go back to Discovery Klingons? Do you want to go back to Discovery Klingons? Because that's how you go back to Discovery Klingons. I'd much rather have these Klingons that aren't perfect. And to be honest, I barely tell the difference. It's close enough. Who gives a fuck? At least it's not those orc-looking bullshit that they had in Season 1 and 2 in Discovery. So please do stop your complaining and be happy with what we got. Just be thankful that these actually look like Klingons and not the bullshit monsters from Discovery. Okay? Count your blessings. That's all I'm saying. Anyway, yeah, so that's pretty much all I have to say about Season 2 of Strange New Worlds. I talked longer than I thought I would, but I always do. Every single time I go to record these season-long reviews, like, I don't have much to say. This is going to be a quick 15-minute video, and I go for an hour. Always happens, every single time, without fail. Anyway, thank you. Oh, before I thank you, let me give my rating for Season 2 of Strange New Worlds. I almost said Lower Decks. I always do that. Season 2 of Strange New Worlds. As a whole, my rating out of 10 is an 8, extremely good. So I gave Season 1 a 9. It was a very strong 9, close to a 10, where I wouldn't say this is a strong 8. It's a moderate 8. But ultimately, it's only one step down from Season 1. So, just to clarify, when I was saying that I thought this was a weaker season, I'm not saying, oh god, this is so much worse than Season 1. Absolutely not. It's a slight step down. It's one ranking down, that's it. It's not that big a deal. But there is a noticeable difference. As I said, this season had bad episodes and Season 1 did not. But the season also had just as many great episodes as Season 1, so that's something. And some of the recurring themes, storylines were very powerful, and I absolutely loved. And as I said, the character stories are still there. I still love these characters. I still love the show. I still think it's the best show on Modern Trek. But some of those character storylines just didn't work. And their main villain with the Gorn, I don't think is working. I think they need to correct course on that. But anyway, that's it for my review for Season 2 of Strange New Worlds. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to check out my channel. I'm doing a live discussion. Probably might come out like right after I upload this video. So if you haven't watched it already, you can probably watch it in the archives. And yeah, I'll be covering Ahsoka, Star Wars show, week to week, and I'll also be covering Lower Decks when that comes out, and in the meantime, of course, going through every episode of Star Trek. Right now I'm at Season 1 of The Next Generation, so you can check out my channel for that and many more videos. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.